Hey everyone, it's Will, Gamer Dad, with another video for you. So in today's video we're going to go over Garambarrel as a 5-star, and I'll do a little bit of gameplay and let you know what I think about him. But the most important question of all is he hot or not?
Of course he's hot. He's tall, dark, and handsome. Sorry, Will.
No big deal. That's why I have my own waifu as well. Anyways, Garam is one of the more recent tanks out there. His VC, especially with VC Grasta, is extremely good. Rage on all enemies, ignore resistance, status immunity on himself 2 times, and barrier that reduces damage to himself by 90% for 5 hits. Quite amazing, actually. Not only that, if he instead starts at the front line, he gives a barrier to all party members at the start of the battle, including those in the back. So keep that in mind. Alright, so let's take a look at his moveset. The ones I use are the Aporido Fierza, I guess. Preemptive Rage, Physical Resistance of himself, 70. Type Shield for everyone, 35% for 3 turns. The fact that it is preemptive is a very nice way to throw up a decent type shield if you're in a pinch. Unfortunately, it doesn't give physical resistance to everybody. Now, his Katara's Fragdia is the power in dual debuff and ignores resistance for inflicting pain. Very, very useful as well. He does have some other moves which I don't find nearly as useful. However, you can definitely tailor it. A lot of it is quite defensive in nature. You can see the regen, speed down for the enemies, and so on and so forth. Now, his main DPS move is the Aroa Felicia. And this one is Wind Pierce Single Target Exo 1 hit. Increased damage if inflicted with pain, and max HP of himself increased by 1,000 and is stackable for 5 times. So keep in mind, it's not 5 times 1,000, it is 1,000, then 500, 500, 500, 500 for a total of 3,000 increased to max. And his damage on this move depends on the max HP to a total of 12,000 HP. And so with this move, you can definitely get him near the top, and you can obviously tailor it depending on how you really want to do his loadout. In terms of its board, pretty standard stuff. I'll let you take a look at those two. Keep in mind that, as usual, I do have MP consumption on him, so what you saw ahead of time was not indicative of the actual cost. Note that he is also an Eastern unit, so you can use Eastern Grasta to share. And again, pretty standard to set up just for now. So let's take him out for a spin. First off, I'd like to give a shout out to one of my Patreon supporters, Seamus Yoder. Thanks for your support. And if you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. I also do have a Patreon account for those who want to support me this way. So, first of all, remember that if he starts in the front line, he automatically gets 100% barrier for 1 hit. And that's for everyone in the front line and in the back as well, from what I believe. Alright, so the great thing is, obviously, if it's a short battle, he basically can kill it before it kills him. Now, in longer fights, he can do the preemptive, which is obviously he still has that barrier to start. He can put that 70% physical resist and 30% type resist too. So against any essential elemental physical attacks, it will be very well shielded, and he will be able to survive many, many attacks. Now, in our first example of some end game content where he can be used, we really do take advantage of his frontline shield. Just because by having that in play, you essentially can survive an HP stopper where it counters with a large hit. And so we're going to do a 1-turn AF against the Enenra / Protection Dogs. Obviously, we're bringing a pretty powerful team with 2 high-end water magic DPS here. We're going to just stack all our buffs and debuffs, having Melissa run our engine in order to do this flash strike stance to stack everything, have everything in play. Keep in mind that since we didn't get hit, that barrier stays on each of our characters until it gets hit once. Alright, so of course, we are using some endgame Grasta here. The water zone Grasta was from a recent boss rush, and Melissa does carry that, which I'll show you in the loadout. And from this point, all you have to do is have a little bit of Ruin Genocide, which will apply Break. We consumed Flamelopus's preemptive Break in the very beginning of the battle, and then it's just 1 hit and we're done there. So very, very useful. And if you look in the back units, they do have that barrier shield as well. So remember that Garambarrel's preemptive shielding when he starts in the front line is for both front and back members, so that if you happen to have to VC in a back unit to switch zone, it will also be protected as well for that one hit. So very, very useful, especially if you might not have as much DPS, or if you have tons of DPS and you need to survive that one hit post HP stopper. Garam is essentially the one for you. Obviously, there's other ways to mitigate damage nowadays. We have units such as ES Iska, or we have Pisaka, for example, AS Mysteria. There's lots of ways to mitigate damage, but Garambarrel still more traditional tanks, got the dual debuff, high HP, can rage on everybody, can give someone 100% barrier, and if VCing in, can barrier himself for 90% for 5 hits. Alright, so in our next example, I want to show you what I mean by giving yourself time to VC in. So same thing, at the start of the battle, he gives everyone a barrier. We're going to do the more traditional way where we VC in a pierce zone. And we're going to have a little bit of fun here. We're actually going with older gear, such that we want to show kind of what we used to experience if we didn't have someone like Garambarrel. Obviously, we had just gotten one-shotted by the Quadri, especially back in the day when there were limited ways of creating zone, and damage was hard to come by. In this case, nowadays, we obviously have top-line DPS such as AS Hismina, which was not available back in the day against Quadri. Obviously, Garam was not as well. Keep in mind that in our 2-turn Pierce Zone AF attack is more than enough just having these units do a ton of damage. And if you check out the loadout, I'm actually not using any Grasta at all. And I'm trying to use older gear just to kind of see what we're up against in terms of potential for enough damage. So the whole point is just showcasing the potential for Garambarrel's tanking abilities. Now, obviously, as a traditional tank, he still has some DPS capabilities, but certainly not as high as some of the top line fighters we see in the game now, especially for Wind Pierce. We do have still obviously True Manifested Suzette, AS Suzette, we have ES Sukiya, and I'll be demonstrating that in our next example after this one. So in this case, we're actually going to try to show a little bit of his DPS side, because we're obviously going to fight something that we can easily overcome, which is Serene. Back in the day, of course, when we first took her on, we didn't have nearly as much Grasta, and our fighting gear, and even our multipliers on some of those older units just wasn't enough to take Serene down easily. With that being said, nowadays we can definitely take it down. It only took a couple of hits, and of course with a lot of endgame Grasta, it really isn't a challenge here. It's more like showing you the numbers that we see. So in comparison, he only has a single target hit. He can still do like 10 million in a single hit against enemies weak to Wind or Pierce. However, obviously, he would normally not be relied on to kind of carry the fight. He's mainly there for debuffing, a little bit of support. You can actually also use him as Grasta carrier, because if you're not relying on him for DPS, you can definitely use him to kind of support your units that way, and basically ensure their survival, which is the most important thing in a lot of the more difficult fights out there, right? Like, as many of you know, especially if you're newer to the game, DPS, especially if you summon the more recent units, it's fairly easy to come by. All the modifiers on their damaging moves are extremely high, and you even have a lot of powerful shields and debuffs. But I think Garambarrel is still one of the only units that can give you 100% barrier for the first turn or the first move against your team, and that's very unique, and hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate him more in the future if I need to. I will also say that in general, if you do have very high DPS and the enemies do not counter back, then more likely than not you won't need Garam on your team. However, against a lot of things like these Battle Simulator or Boss Rush, he becomes indispensable, because there's certain phases that you get hit multiple times, or it's just that they target the same unit over and over again. You can easily die to that. So note that in our final example here, we're going to do Boss Rush Stage 4, Weak to Wind, and Cascading Quakes. And note that in this example, we actually did VC in. So By VCing him in, he guarantees rage on all enemies, so they're going to attack him. He has a 5-hit barrier of 90% reduction, plus a 2-hit status barrier too. And if you notice, if you have done this fight at all, you'll know that a lot of the enemies here can inflict multiple statuses: pain, poison, stone, stun, so on and so forth. And by having him here, he can kind of draw a lot of the attention away from the rest of your team, especially Iesukia, who in adversity mode has just less HP than average, does a ton of damage, but she's fragile. And so if you don't have someone like him on your team, you have to find other ways of survival. You can obviously have different team comps, but in this case, we're here to showcase how Garam can help you survive. So this is what I mean by targeting. Notice that he actually takes very little damage because he actually has that 70% physical shield on himself, as well as that rage. Those ogres, if they hit you normally, oh, your team would have been wiped already. And especially because he's raging it, all 4 hits go to him, which is fine. Alright, so wave 3. So again, obviously it takes some practice, especially if you haven't fought these before. Definitely looking up the moveset or watching other videos to kind of see what you're up against will help you plan out how to kind of fight these fights. In this case, I knew that on wave 3, the very first turn of the enemies, they're not going to attack, and so we can kind of set up our buffs and debuffs. Note that his dual debuff is not preemptive, and so in the first turn where I didn't get attacked, I cast a dual debuff first, and then in the second turn of this wave, I cast a preemptive type shield plus rage plus physical resist on himself, allowing our team to survive. Because if I did it the other way, the enemy would actually preemptively cast Calamity Saxum first, in which case that AoE would have wiped our team if we didn't do the type 2 dual debuff first. Anyways, at the second HP stopper, again it does it, and because we already still do have that dual debuff active, remember that his dual debuff lasts for 3 turns, we're able to survive yet again. And obviously AS Foreign is our healer. Each time she attacks, she heals our team for up to 1800, which is really, really, really useful. Because as you get to these kind of fights where everything is kind of difficult, you definitely need a healer on your team. Especially since many of them have HP stoppers, and like I said, more of the later fights counter with hits on those HP stoppers, because really the devs know that we have access to zones, 1-turn AS, 2-turn AS, depending on whether or not we use Grasta or Flash Strike stance in our team, and so they're putting more and more difficult kind of mechanics to counter that, which you've seen in some of those optional fights like the EPS fights and so on and so forth. Okay, so we had a whole bar, and we're just gonna bar this down for wave 4. Remember that if we have an ES unit, by charging that green bar that's glowing now right underneath the AF bar, you now activate the EX move, which in this case Iesukia has the EX move, giving us I believe it's regen, MP recovery, and a hold ground on all our units. We will not require that. We won't nearly take any lethal damage in this particular fight because we do have Garambarrel, the very powerful Titan tank on our team, but might as well just wipe these guys as well. Keep in mind that if you are on wave 4, they actually have a preemptive slap, and those slaps can kill each of your characters, and so that's why you actually have to save an AF for wave 4 if possible. Alright. Now again, you've probably seen this in action, but keep in mind, we do have 2 zone setters in play. I know this fight is about Garambarrel, but since we're watching anyways, remember that we do have 2 zone setters. Both of them are Pierce setters. Each of them give a turn end weapon boost for Pierce units, and so they are cumulative. However, they do have diminishing returns, but having both of them boost is a great addition, so all your Pierce units do a lot more damage. Keep in mind that Garam, again, is not relied on for DPS. If you've noticed, for all these tough fights, what is he doing? Casting the support after support after support. He does have some capability to attack because mainly he is attacking during the AF, so he still adds hits to your AF as opposed to someone who's not a Pierce unit, and so obviously he works best in both Pierce teams and Win teams as a really great tank. Obviously, you would have to kind of tailor his use if he's used outside of those two teams. And you can still use a tank outside the normal zone type. It's just that during the AF, they won't add anything to the AF bar unless you kind of substitute a move to the zone you're doing, especially if it's a weapon zone or an elemental zone. All right, so loadouts, pretty standard stuff. Note that we know that our main DPS is going to be our 2 wind pierce units. Foreign is more of a support, even though she has some DPS, but note that she's not the one pushing everyone to HP stoppers. And Garam, again, carrying Grasta to our team. All right, so in conclusion, Garam is a great addition for rosters of all skill levels. Obviously, in the early stages and mid stages can help you survive tougher fights. In the end stages can really help you conquer those really difficult endgame fights that might require more survival skills rather than pure DPS. Anyways, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.